Story number 1. I feel a sense of shame as I reflect on what happened. I never imagined that I would have such a close relationship with my son-in-law. My name is Amelia, and this all happened as I was approaching my 45th birthday. People often tell me that I look much younger than my years. That may be true, but my personal life has been pretty lonely. My husband and I separated a long time ago, leaving no room for romantic entanglements. I got used to this single life and focused on raising my children. Thankfully, I have a great relationship with them and we socialize often. They bring great joy to my life. However, the one who calls me most often is my youngest daughter, Mila. She has been married for 2 years now. I am truly happy for her, especially since her husband, Donald, is a capable and accomplished man who does everything around the house. He affectionately calls me his favorite mom and even surprises me with flowers and candy all the time. He is always there for me, never hesitating to lend a helping hand. Recently, I decided to renovate my country house and wanted to involve my youngest daughter in the process. However, she quickly informed me that she had her own things to do at work and would not be able to join me. I was a little disappointed and took it to heart, thinking that I would have to do the gardening alone again. But then Mila heard my saddened voice and kindly offered to send her husband, Donald, to help me. After all, it was his day off. Without hesitation, I accepted her generous offer. Donald is a wonderful man, and I knew he would be a great help to me. The time came, and Donald, my son-in-law, came to lend a helping hand. Most importantly, the long journey didn't spoil his mood. As usual, he greeted me with a beautiful flower, which brought a smile to my face. We didn't spend much time chatting over coffee, but got right to work. Donald took a bucket and spent most of the afternoon picking apples. I offered him a break, but he's like that. Once he starts doing it, you can't stop him. He told me, Amelia, I don't like to quit a job I haven't finished. I want to do it and forget it. By evening, Donald was exhausted and decided to take a break. I made sure he had a good meal and a glass of juice. He liked the food so much that he asked for a piece of meat as well, which was very tasty. After eating and resting, he offered to help me clean up the barn where my favorite horse, Wave, lived. As we entered the barn, I pointed out the straw in the corner that needed to be removed to make room for tools. And then something happened that I'm not proud of. My son-in-law hugged me, kissed me, and pushed me onto the straw. I was surprised, but deep down, I knew this is what I wanted all along, so I made up the story of cleaning out the barn. That's where it all unfolded, and his skillful hands took care of everything. You understand, it wasn't just his hands that satisfied me. My son-in-law is an expert in this field. He fulfilled all my desires because it was hard for me to live without male attention. I'm not old yet, and I take care of myself. We were a little embarrassed after our actions. But that's life, and it's hard to resist temptation no matter what it is. That's how my son-in-law and I moved to a new level of relationship and kept everything a secret.
Story number 2.
Yesterday was such a fantastic day. We had an amazing time with my father-in-law and mother-in-law. The laughter and joy flowed like a river. While we were enjoying our drinks, my father-in-law couldn't help but praise Aubrey's mother-in-law. He praised her as a loving wife who takes care of herself and has a passion for skiing and biathlon. It turned out that they used to play on a local team together, and Aubrey's mother-in-law worked as a full-time Methodist minister. It's a demanding and responsible position, and on top of that, she's an athlete. My father-in-law playfully vouched for his wife's multitasking ability. Among all of us, she truly shone as the brightest and most energetic woman. Not only was she beautiful and kind-hearted, but she was also incredibly easy to be around. She was always ready to lend a helping hand. And now, as morning came, I couldn't help but reflect on how wonderful we had spent last night. Although my head was throbbing from the drink, I was thankful that I didn't have to go to work today. Instead, I could just relax on the couch in my newly purchased apartment. In the morning, my wife had to get up and go to work, even though she didn't want to. Plus, she had a headache because she drank a lot of wine last night. I always felt terrible after the holiday on days like that. I felt sluggish, unmotivated, and needed affection. I considered calling my wife, but she answered the phone nervously and reluctantly. It was clear that my attempt to invite her home for a few hours had failed. On the table, I noticed a newspaper with an open page that featured escort agencies, one of which had a headline about the most expensive girls in town. I quickly dismissed the thought, thinking I haven't stooped to that level yet. Then I remembered that my mother-in-law had promised to visit me yesterday and make me a nice dinner since she had the day off too. Apparently, she wasn't feeling well either. Despite this, she agreed to come. My mother-in-law, Aubrey, has always been a symbol of purity, righteousness, and intelligence to me. I felt like I knew her well, and we had a close bond. She would tell me about her grievances with my father-in-law and give me advice on how to be a wife in certain situations. We were like two secret allies in our families, and there was no way I expected things to turn out this way. But let's go through everything in order. My mother-in-law came in with a bottle of wine and a large piece of roast meat. We silently drank a glass of wine and ate a piece of meat. After a few glasses, my mother-in-law suddenly asked me why I was staring at her legs and if I liked her. It was a little awkward, but I mustered up the courage to confess my feelings. I kissed her. She seemed taken aback, but then warned me that it was wrong. We both realized the seriousness of the situation, but we had overstepped our bounds. When she left, we silently agreed to keep our secret. It's been 3 years now, and no one suspects a thing. Let's hope that this will continue to be the case to avoid any complications in our lives.
Story number 3. This past September was the most wonderful month for me in recent years. As soon as my vacation started, I wasted no time in implementing the plans I had carefully designed for my free time. My main goal was to drink as many invigorating beers as possible, and then spend the evening at a local bar, fully immersed in the bliss of vacation. Reconnecting with old acquaintances and friends was not part of my plans, as I was eager to embark on an exciting new adventure. After my divorce, I found solace in the company of a charming young woman who filled my heart with love. While she worked diligently at her law firm during the day, I took the opportunity to indulge in alcohol, ensuring that I would be relatively sober by the time she finished work. We would meet at the entrance to her work and then proceed to engage in a series of pleasurable activities, such as going to the movies or dancing at a club. However, on one of the usual days, as I was heading towards downtown, I heard someone call out to me from behind. "Gary." Despite my ingrained habit of ignoring such greetings, I was intrigued by the unfamiliar female voice. Who could be so bold as to call out to me in the middle of a busy street? Slowly turning toward the source of the voice, I pondered my options. When I finally met my gaze with the person who had called out to me, I was stunned and almost stumbled. Standing in front of me was a woman, about 45 years old, radiating warmth and affection with her smile. I want to say I was 29 years old and belonged to a subgroup of people in a non-traditional profession. At the time, however, such details seemed trivial. Yet this woman possessed a certain beauty despite her slight fullness. Her eyes radiated genuine happiness when we met, and there was a hint of curiosity in them, as if asking if I recognized her. Naturally, I recognized her from the first moment. She looked younger and even a little slimmer than before. Standing before me was, as I used to call her, my ex's mother. "I recognize you, Gary," she exclaimed happily. My mind raced through my thoughts on how to handle this unexpected situation. "Hi," I greeted, waving my hand slightly. My face reflected complete delight at this unexpected encounter. One of the valuable lessons I've learned in life is to be honest. "Where are you headed?" I inquired. "Home," she replied, slightly out of breath. "Why take public transportation?" "Let me give you a ride in my car." I never expected to utter such words to my former mother-in-law. Her blue eyes were mesmerizing. They always tended to portray her as a sophisticated and noble person. However, after living with her daughter for 5 years and experiencing happiness and love, I gradually discovered the true nature of my mother-in-law's family values. At first, I was unaware of her tendency to deceive my husband, but after learning the truth, I began to affectionately call her my beloved mother. It didn't take much effort for me to convince her to get in the car. Here we were on our way, and Angela paid a flattering compliment to my car, at the same time trying to ask me about my profession in an equally flattering way. I responded as usual, politely turning my attention back to her. "How are you doing?" "How's your daughter?" I asked, briefly distracted from the conversation. Her smile disappeared, and she fell silent, letting me know that things at home were not going well. Sensing the change in mood, I decided to change the subject. "And you look even more beautiful, I must say," I remarked, looking into her eyes in a slightly seductive tone. After a brief pause, she smiled sweetly and began discussing our past. "You and Emily would make a lovely couple," she said. As we approached a familiar house that I had painful memories with, she playfully asked if I would give her a ride to the driveway. "Of course, Angela. How could I refuse?" "You may be my former mother-in-law, but you're still my family," I replied with a smile. "I'll also carry your bag. It seems small, but it's heavy." "Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it," she replied. After carrying the bag into the kitchen, I got ready to leave. However, the mother-in-law suggested, "Gary, if you have some time, we could have a little talk," and the mother-in-law became more energetic. She then placed a bottle of wine on the table and added, "You won't be able to resist such an offer, especially since I know how to entice you." We sat in the living room on the couch and made idle chit-chat. Her bright blue eyes were already filled with excitement. As I sipped another glass of wine, I kept my eyes on her dress, which revealed a deep cleavage. I must admit that my mother-in-law has very large breasts, and I prefer everything voluminous. My mother-in-law noticed my lustful gaze and pulled me closer to her breasts, which almost made me choke. Things went on from there, and although I was tired of playing games with her for so long, I felt satisfied because my ex-wife was inexperienced in the bedroom. Moreover, my current girlfriend, the one I live with, is not capable of such things. As a result, we stayed up until early morning, engrossed in watching a romantic movie, so to speak. When morning came, I said goodbye, and my mother-in-law kissed her favorite son-in-law affectionately goodbye, expressing her gratitude and urging me to come more often, as it was getting boring without me. I nodded in agreement and headed back home. Story number 4.
Before watching the video, I ask you to support me by giving me a like and subscribing to the channel. Thank you. Our adventure began with a significant renovation of the house where my wife and I lived with her parents. We slept all together on the floor in one room, with me and my father-in-law on the edges and our girls in the middle. Meanwhile, the other 2 rooms were being worked on. Workers were replacing doors, windows, floors, and anything else that needed repair. Conditions were far from ideal, with dust, dirt, and construction debris strewn everywhere. Despite my mother-in-law's efforts to maintain order, the chaos of the renovations continued unabated. Everyone was eagerly waiting for the renovations to be completed so they could get back to normal. After more than 2 months of waiting, the end finally came. The only thing left to do in my mother-in-law's room, whose name was Maya, was to paste wallpaper. While my wife and her father were at work, my mother-in-law and I spent all day helping the workers in the largest room where the workload was overwhelming. When the workers left in the evening, my father-in-law and my wife returned. When they had dinner, my mother-in-law offered to wallpaper her room, but my husband refused, citing work obligations for the next day. As a result, there was a controversy between them. My wife also said she had to get up early. In general, it was uncomfortable for me to refuse, although I had worked hard in our room all day helping the workers. My mother-in-law prepared glue, and we closed all the windows and doors so that the wallpaper would not peel off later. I was wearing old jeans and a t-shirt, and my mother-in-law was wearing a tight-fitting t-shirt and athletic pants. Strangely, I hadn't noticed before how attractive my mother-in-law was. She looked radiant and fragrant. Today, however, I paid attention to her, and she exuded elegance and femininity. The room was a little hot due to the fact that everything was covered and we had to jump and bend over. If you've ever glued wallpaper, you probably understand the feeling. As we were gluing one wall, we were already sweating, and I took off my shirt. My mother-in-law's t-shirt and gym clothes were damp too, and it became quite uncomfortable. I couldn't take my eyes off her, and a plan began to form in my head. We continued wallpapering, but I was no longer paying attention to how we were wallpapering because my mind was on other things, more important things. My mother-in-law mentioned that her lower back was hurting, so we decided to switch positions. Now she was standing on the table, and I was on the floor, applying the wallpaper and passing it up to her. She would glue the top and smooth it out, while I did the rest of the work downstairs. As I handed her the next sheet, we involuntarily touched each other constantly. It happened involuntarily, and my mother-in-law didn't pay much attention to it. However, I couldn't help but notice it and felt trapped. In addition, because of the ongoing renovations, my wife and I had not had intimacy for a long time. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I was drawn to my mother-in-law. At one point, when she bent down to lift the wallpaper, I couldn't resist and kissed her. My mother-in-law almost collapsed at the table, but I gently supported her and told her to sit down. The whole process of intimacy went at a breakneck pace, and neither construction debris, wallpaper, nor glue cans got in our way. After this delightful session of wallpapering, we went to bed, tired but satisfied. Before doing so, we agreed to behave as usual and keep our experiment a secret. It turned out to be a wonderful experience, and all thanks to renovation, which I despised at first, but eventually found joy in collaborating with my mother-in-law. Perhaps the renovation isn't as scary as I thought it would be. We now look forward to each day when my wife and father-in-law leave for work, which allows us to work with redoubled enthusiasm.
Story number 5.
4 years ago, this incident happened to me. It seems quite funny now, but it was far from humorous at the time. All the events unfolded in a country house. I gathered all the necessary things and headed to the destination, not forgetting to take with me prescribed medication for joint pain. Upon seeing me, my mother-in-law expressed her delight and hugged me tightly. "Finally, my assistant has arrived," she exclaimed. Soon my father-in-law also arrived, praising me for being a good son-in-law and helping them in everything. We settled into the house, and I quickly unpacked my things, putting all the pills in the nightstand where I usually kept various medicines. After a hearty lunch, my mother-in-law took me to the vegetable garden to tell me what needed to be done. At first, I took care of the garden, removed unwanted plants, and cleared the flower beds. Eventually, after a few hours of labor, the task was almost complete. Naturally, I was sweating profusely, but felt relieved that most of the work was done. Exhausted, I returned to the house and asked my mother-in-law where my father-in-law was. However, she only scolded him, informing him that the prankster had gone to his friend's house to play a game of poker. They will most likely spend the entire night smoking and playing another game of cards. The discomfort in my joints caused me to walk over to the nightstand to get my medicine. To my horror, I found everything lying in disarray and the pills scattered and jumbled. After a short search, I managed to find my pill. I took it and headed for the shower. Upon returning from the shower, I felt something wrong. Then I realized that I had taken the wrong pills by mistake. In a hurry, I rushed to the medicine cabinet and realized that I had indeed taken the wrong medicine. It turned out that the pills were meant for my father-in-law. At the very least, they were supposed to enhance their nightly entertainment with my mother-in-law. My vision blurred and my mother-in-law called out to me for help. However, I was completely oblivious to her pleas, looking at her and realizing for the first time what a beautiful mother-in-law I had. Sandra called out to me once more, but I remained motionless on the couch, unable to get up. My mother-in-law sensed something was wrong and crouched down next to me. I tried to assure her that everything was fine, but she could already see my mountain of emotions in my pants. That's when I confessed that I had mixed it up with the pills. Sandra exclaimed, "What are you doing, son-in-law? You need help right away." My mother-in-law ended up being very understanding and supportive. She helped me tremendously in that moment. This is my mother-in-law and his story from 4 years ago, after which we didn't even remember that incident. These pills for my father-in-law allowed me to perceive my mother-in-law in a new light.